Danica Cole, a name synonymous with brilliance, grit, and self-made excellence, had built her billion-dollar real estate empire from the ground up, not because the world had welcomed her in, but because it tried to shut her out again and again, and she refused to be silenced. She was a black woman in a world that doubted her from the start, a woman who'd once walked clients door to door in heels, with a busted car and handwritten brochures, a woman who'd out-negotiated Wall Street brokers, turned overlooked neighborhoods into luxury zones, and taught young agents to lead with integrity. But something had changed, and it crept up like rot behind fresh paint. Her downtown flagship office, once a proud symbol of her brand's hustle-meets-heart culture, had grown cold, sharp-edged, and whisper-quiet beneath its polished surface. And Danica, who had trusted the lieutenants she left in charge while she expanded nationally, began to see troubling signs. Deals falling through for no clear reason, new hires quitting in weeks, and a slow bleed of energy that no quarterly report could explain. She tried confronting her district manager, but got corporate speak in return. Empty reassurances and cherry-picked data. And that's when Danica made a decision that would rewrite everything. Not a press release, not a surprise visit in heels and power suits, but something deeper, riskier, more intimate and raw. She would disappear, not as CEO but as nobody, a ghost in her own house. And so she created a false identity, Janine. Middle-aged, quiet, a night janitor, contracted from a cleaning service, no college degree, no corporate credentials, just a mop, gloves, and silence, slipping into her own building after hours, wearing a faded jumpsuit and sneakers with no jewelry, no makeup, her natural curls hidden beneath a head wrap. And in that disguise, invisible by design, she began to witness the truth they'd hidden from her. The difference between the image they sold her and the venom they spilled when they thought the lights were low and no one was listening. The first night, she kept her head down, cleaning the break room, and caught a senior broker mocking a young intern's ethnic name to laughter, unaware she was being overheard by the woman who signed his commission checks. On the second night, she found a discarded termination letter for a promising black agent who'd just closed her first major deal. Too aggressive, the reason said, and later overheard the same team leaders joking about how she didn't fit the company vibe. By the third night, Danica's heart had turned from bruised to burning. She emptied waste bins while listening to the HR head dismiss a harassment complaint on speakerphone, saying, "We'll wait till she quits on her own, saves us the paperwork." And that same night, she spotted her own portrait, the official CEO headshot, photoshopped onto a meme in the team Slack channel open on an unlocked desktop, the caption reading, "Queen Danica watching from her ivory tower," followed by clown emojis and GIFs. And every night after that brought deeper cracks, agents coercing clients into signing overpriced deals, laughing about how they wouldn't know the difference anyway, the white male supervisors calling younger female agents sweetheart and princess in meetings, then berating them when no one else was around, the shared jokes, the gatekeeping, the manipulation, all while revenue was being siphoned off by lazy management who faked performance metrics with staged calls and ghost listings. Danica started keeping notes, detailed, time-stamped, irrefutable, on her phone hidden inside her mop bucket, capturing not just what was happening, but who was saying what, when, and how often. She listened to her empire bleed beneath the surface of polished floors and brushed steel conference rooms. And each night, as she quietly scrubbed toilets and wiped coffee stains from granite counters, her mind built a plan, not of revenge, but of reckoning. The people she'd entrusted had not only betrayed her values, they'd built a toxic culture that festered behind closed doors, and worse, they'd done it assuming she would never see it, hear it, or care enough to dig. They underestimated her because of the power she wielded silently, and because their privilege had taught them to believe a black woman could not be both founder and enforcer, could not wield the sword and the torch. And Danica, with every insult, she endured in silence. Every flaw she mopped without acknowledgement, every overheard slur and manipulation, began to shed not her power, but her patience. She was not simply cleaning filth. She was collecting evidence, building a reckoning. And by the end of her fifth night undercover, she knew. This branch had become a cancer that needed to be cut out at the root, not treated gently. And she was ready to be surgeon, executioner, and phoenix in one. The betrayal didn't break her. It refined her, and as she walked out that night, blending into the quiet dawn with her fake ID badge still clipped to her jumpsuit, she wasn't bitter. She was ready. The staff at her flagship thought they were untouchable, hidden behind false loyalty, polished smiles and hollow diversity slogans, but they were about to discover that their CEO didn't just lead from behind a desk, she led from the ground. And by morning, every last one of them would learn that underestimating Danica Cole was the most expensive mistake of their careers. Danica Cole, now deep into her covert operation as Janine the Janitor, walked into her 6th night of surveillance with no illusion left about the culture that had grown under her absence. It wasn't just rot, it was systemic decay, rooted in arrogance, entitlement, and an unchecked belief that success forgave all sins. Each night she kept her head down, but her eyes and ears wide open, absorbing the dysfunction like a sponge while cleaning the very surfaces that masked it all. The high-gloss conference tables where unethical deals were struck, the gleaming elevator panels touched by hands stained with greed, the immaculate offices where her own mission had been twisted into something predatory. What hurt most wasn't just the racism or misogyny she encountered in passing comments and cruel jokes, but the way the system they'd built excluded anyone who didn't conform to their image of marketable. They blocked minority hires from key opportunities, rigged client pairings to favor white agents, and created subtle barriers wrapped in professional language like culture fit and brand voice. While Danica sat silently listening to the worst offenders laugh about how they dodged another diversity hire or referred to inner-city listings as poverty packages, all the while pretending to be inclusive during public Zoom meetings and DEI audits, the branch manager, a man Danica once mentored personally, led these charades with the smarmy confidence of someone who had built an ecosystem where cruelty was camouflaged as strategy, and Danica had to grit her teeth through moments that would have broken others, like the time she overheard the assistant director, a white woman who bragged about her urban outreach, openly complain that too many black agents make the office feel like a recruitment center, or the moment an intern, confused and hurt, was told to tone down her hair and speak more clearly if she wanted to be taken seriously in front of clients. Danica watched all of this unfold while sweeping, polishing, and collecting every scrap of evidence. Handwritten notes, screenshots from Slack channels, discarded meeting transcripts, casual conversations left playing on speakers, even trash cans filled with shredded complaints that were never reported to corporate. She gathered it all, documenting with silent fury, as the HR director blatantly ignored serious allegations, including one from a female agent who had recorded her team leader offering her better commissions in exchange for drinks after hours, only to be told that flirting isn't harassment unless he touches you. Danica saw how the few non-white employees left at the branch had retreated into silence, some visibly drained, others walking with a tension that spoke of emotional exhaustion, and she felt their pain, not just as their CEO, but as someone who had lived that same story when she was young, hustling for approval in rooms that didn't want her in them unless she stayed small, silent, grateful. Worse still was the outright theft. Seasoned agents who skimmed commissions from junior hires, who rerouted premium listings to friends and family, and forged client signatures on inflated valuations, all while bragging about how corporate doesn't know how this game works. They thought she was just another cleaning lady with no place in their orbit, no reason to remember their names or words. But they had no idea the ghost in the room was the one who built the building they stood in, and with every night that passed, Danica's resolve sharpened. She began to move strategically, gathering stories from the few decent employees left, like Alana, a receptionist who worked late and once whispered, "You should get out of here. This place is poison," unaware she was speaking to the woman who signed her paychecks, or Jamal, a young closings assistant who spoke gently with elderly clients but got constantly passed over for promotions despite leading in performance, and who once muttered while sorting files, "No matter what you do, they'll never see you here." Danica's rage was not wild or reckless. It was measured, waiting for the right time, the right exposure, the right trap, because she knew that a public accusation could be spun, but irrefutable proof, layered and cross-referenced, would be a blade none of them could dodge. She used burner phones to record conversations, timed screenshots to company devices left unlocked, and even planted a few fake memos, harmless but with just enough bait, to see which managers leaked internal information to competitors, and within hours she had the names of 3 executives who were double-dealing on listings while on Danika's payroll. What shocked her the most, however, wasn't just the ethical rot. It was the pride they took in it, how they saw their actions not as betrayals, but as justified hustle, laughing that nobody gets rich playing by the rules while sipping overpriced coffee and mocking clients behind their backs, especially if they were immigrants, elderly, or non-white. She watched one team edit listing photos to hide signs of damage in black neighborhoods, claiming those folks don't inspect anything anyway, and another agent purposely delay paperwork for a Spanish-speaking family, betting they wouldn't. Notice the expiration date on their offer. Danika's heart cracked every time she witnessed this, but she never flinched, never cried. She simply recorded, documented, catalogued the cruelty, building a case so bulletproof that not even her company's legal team could second-guess it when the time came. Her days were long, her nights were longer, and her fury never dulled. Instead, it transformed into something colder, heavier, righteous. They thought they were above consequence, untouchable beneath the shield of corporate success. But Danika knew what they had forgotten, that the higher you rise on a stolen ladder, the harder the fall when the ground beneath you was never yours to stand on. And each time she entered the building as Janine, mop in hand and back aching, she was reminded of the people they had silenced, the careers they'd derailed, the lives they'd damaged in pursuit of shortcuts. And she promised herself that it wouldn't end with emails, suspensions, or HR warnings. No, Danika would gut the infection from the inside, expose every lie, and remind them, brutally, unmistakably, that power isn't about title or appearance, it's about control, and she still held every thread. They could shred all the paperwork they wanted, gossip about the absentee boss, and post memes mocking her leadership. But by the time she was done, they wouldn't just lose their jobs. They would be erased from the house they thought they owned, and every brick of that reckoning was now stacked, waiting for the match she'd soon strike in full view of the empire they had poisoned. Friday morning arrived with the weight of something seismic, rumbling just beneath the surface. And though no one could quite put a finger on it, the atmosphere inside the flagship office of Cole & Cross Properties was thick with a low-grade tension. Agents whispered in corners, assistants checked Slack channels compulsively, and even the smug senior leadership team, typically too comfortable in their unshakable positions, looked over their shoulders more than usual. It started with an unexpected company-wide email from a rarely used internal address, ceocolecross.global, with the subject line, Emergency Team Meeting, Mandatory Attendance, 9 a.m. sharp, and beneath the cold font and clipped wording, every employee instinctively sensed that something was about to detonate. When they arrived in the large conference room that morning, most assumed it would be about layoffs or quarterly restructuring, perhaps another performance audit or compliance training. What they didn't expect was the woman who walked through the double-glass doors at exactly 9 a.m., not in a jumpsuit or with a mop in hand, but in a tailored pitch-black suit with gold cufflinks, a diamond-tipped Montblanc pen in her inner pocket, her natural curls styled into a coiled crown, and a stare that carried the calm weight of an oncoming storm. Danika Cole, their CEO, their ghost, their phantom observer, now in full command of the very room where her name had been mocked, her authority ridiculed, her portrait turned into memes. Jaws dropped, hands froze mid-text, and silence fell like a thunderclap. The janitor was the boss, the ghost was the judge, and every smirk that had once curled across careless faces melted into confusion, then panic, then dread as Danika took her place at the head of the conference table and placed a remote control on the surface like a loaded weapon. Without saying a word, she turned on the screen behind her, and then it began. The first clip was grainy security footage from the break room. Audio crisp, date stamped, undeniable, a senior broker snickering about diversity hires while mimicking a black agent's accent. Gasps rippled through the room, but Danika didn't flinch. She pressed another button, and another clip played. this time showing the HR director brushing off a harassment claim, her voice eerily calm as she suggested, "We let her burn out naturally." Another click, and a Slack thread lit up the screen. Private labeled Inner Circle with emojis and photos mocking clients, slandering team members, and even targeting Danica herself with layers of vitriol and unfiltered arrogance. Names were visible, messages were time-stamped, and no one could argue context because Danica had receipts, screenshots, emails, logs, audio files, and cross-referenced documents all displayed with clinical precision. Then she finally spoke, and her voice was not raised, not vengeful. It was steady, low, deliberate. "You thought no one was watching. You were wrong." A tremor passed through the crowd, and someone tried to interject, a stammered excuse. But Danica raised one hand and continued, "What you did wasn't just unprofessional. It was unethical, illegal, and most of all, a betrayal of this company, of our mission, and of the people you chose to target, exploit, and silence." She turned and pointed to a line of individuals entering the room, corporate auditors, employment lawyers, compliance officers, and IT security personnel, all carrying tablets, file boxes, and thick envelopes. "Today we clean house," she said, and with that the first termination was announced. The branch director, red-faced and wide-eyed, was handed a folder and asked to step out. The security team, previously unseen, but stationed just outside. The room escorted him silently. The HR director was next, followed by the assistant team lead, 3 top-performing agents known for toxic behavior, and several department heads who had laughed the loudest when they thought no one would hear. Danica didn't stop there. She read out client complaints that had been ignored, quoted anonymous surveys buried by management, and pulled up listing falsification logs that showed illegal practices masked by creative marketing. Each firing was swift but not cruel. She delivered them like a surgeon removing necrotic tissue, focused not on punishment, but on healing what remained. Those who hadn't been directly involved but remained silent were told plainly. Complicity had consequences, and if they chose not to speak when they had power to intervene, they would not be rewarded now. Some broke down in tears, others tried to rationalize, deflect, or deny. But Danica had come prepared for every excuse, every attempt at shifting blame. Her legal team handed out NDAs, final paychecks, and exit documents with stunning efficiency, and by 11 a.m., over 60% of the staff had been escorted from the premises. What remained was a stunned skeleton crew, young, frightened interns, a few quiet assistants, a couple of underpaid junior agents whose performance records glowed in silence, and they all stared at Danica like she was a myth made real. She turned to them, not as a punisher, but as a leader reborn, and said, "If you ever felt invisible here, I see you now. And I promise you this, we will rebuild and we will do it right." Her voice cracked slightly, the first human note in hours of controlled fire, and she reached out to Jamal, the closings assistant, pulling up his report as an example of excellence. Dedication and quiet brilliance ignored by toxic leadership. He didn't speak, just nodded, overwhelmed by the moment, as Danica made it clear that integrity wasn't a buzzword at Cole & Cross, it was the new law. Then, with the office still reeling, she opened the final slide on the screen. A map of new leadership positions, openings for internal promotion, and an invitation to rebuild the team, not with false loyalty or resumes built on privilege, but with vision, courage, and equity. The last thing she did before leaving that conference room was walk over to the framed meme of her that had been printed and pinned to a cubicle wall, the one with the clown emojis and mocking crown. She picked it up, held it in the air for a long beat, and then fed it into a shredder placed beside the table, the hiss of paper destruction echoing louder than any applause could have. Then she turned to the remaining employees and said calmly, "Back to work. There's a future to build." And with that, Danica Cole, the woman they had once dismissed as absent, too nice, or out of touch, walked out, not just as CEO but as architect of rebirth, having reminded every single person in that building that leadership isn't about watching from above, it's about walking through the storm, even in a janitor's uniform, and still choosing to rebuild when the fire is out. In the weeks that followed the purge, Danica Cole didn't retreat into the polished glass office that bore her name in gold lettering. She stayed on the floor, in the trenches, with the people who remained, sleeves rolled, heart wide open. Not for show or press, but because rebuilding demanded more than leadership. It demanded presence, trust, humility, and a steel spine. She personally interviewed every remaining employee, not to intimidate, but to listen. She wanted to know their stories, their struggles, the moments they almost quit, but didn't. And from those raw conversations, she began to weave a blueprint, not just for a company, but for a culture where integrity wasn't optional. It was oxygen. She replaced every senior manager with hires who weren't just qualified, but proven protectors of fairness. People like Maya Hughes, a former community organizer turned real estate analyst who knew how to read markets and hearts in equal measure, and Reggie Walters, a Marine vet and former mortgage counselor who had personally saved dozens of families from foreclosure during the housing crisis, now promoted to Director of Compliance with the full backing to burn every shady loophole to the ground. Danica didn't just stop at personnel. She tore through policy, reimagining everything from client intake to contract finalization, implementing transparent tracking systems for every deal, every commission, every dollar, all visible to staff, at every level, so no one could manipulate data behind closed doors again. She launched Project Reclaim, an internal equity initiative that prioritized listings in historically redlined neighborhoods, offered pro bono consultation to families targeted by predatory agents, and required all agents to undergo cultural humility training, not as a formality but as a rite of passage into the kind of company that Cole & Cross would now become. The office environment transformed overnight, from hushed suspicion to open collaboration, from cliques to community. Desks once guarded like territories became shared workspaces of mentorship, innovation, and mutual respect. Interns like Alana were now rising stars, contributing ideas in strategy meetings and helping onboard new hires with a pride that came from finally being seen, while employees like Jamal, now the youngest team lead in company history, became a living emblem of resilience rewarded. Danica made sure his office had a window, not because of hierarchy, but because light belonged to those who had endured the darkness. Meanwhile, outside the office walls, the world had taken notice. First local papers, then national outlets, then business schools and think tanks who dissected Danica's bold sweep as if it were a corporate thriller, some hailing her as visionary, others calling her reckless, with headlines ranging from CEO turned spy in own empire to black woman cleans house, literally and legally. Talk shows invited her to speak, podcasts begged for interviews, and while Danica accepted a few invitations to share her story, she was careful not to let her image eclipse the deeper work. She wasn't interested in becoming a celebrity CEO. She wanted to be an example, a warning, a blueprint. To that end, she partnered with non-profit organizations to create scholarships for young women of color, pursuing careers in real estate and finance, launched a mentorship exchange with HBCUs, and created a nationwide ethics network called the Glass Broom, where whistleblowers from across industries could report toxic practices safely and anonymously, ensuring that her fire didn't stop at her office. It would spread as light in the shadows of others still unseen. Internally, she invited every employee, old and new, to a round table once a month where nothing was off limits, where they could challenge policy, propose change, and question leadership without fear, and she meant it. At the first meeting, a junior analyst questioned the language used in client reports, and rather than shut it down, Danica had the entire department rewrite the documentation protocol that same week. She also hired therapists, conflict mediators, and resilience coaches, not because the team was broken, but because healing was ongoing, and she believed in equipping people not just to survive, but to grow. And yet, even as the culture shifted, and the accolades poured in, Danica never let the pain of the past slip away entirely. She kept a framed collage on her office wall, made from the shredded remains of the meme that once mocked her, beneath which was a simple brass plaque that read, "You thought I was mopping floors. I was cleaning house." A quiet reminder of what she'd endured and what she'd chosen not to become. She was offered book deals, board seats, and lucrative partnerships with global firms who wanted to capitalize on her fame. but she declined. Most of them, choosing instead to invest in building integrity capital, a term she coined in a now-famous LinkedIn essay where she wrote, "A business without soul is just an expensive lie. Build your house with glass walls and open doors, or one day someone like me will sweep it clean." Her words echoed across industries, sparking debates in business schools, C-suites and HR departments about what it meant to lead from below, to observe before judging, to dismantle before rebuilding, not out of rage but out of love for something greater than personal gain. In the third quarter following the shakeup, Cole & Cross posted record profits, not because of aggressive growth, but because of loyalty, transparency, and word of mouth from clients who now trusted them more than ever. Families who had once been overlooked were now empowered to buy, sell, and invest with dignity. Neighborhoods once deemed undesirable were thriving under new attention. And agents who once felt voiceless now led innovation workshops, mentorship circles, and client advocacy panels. Danica made one final structural change. She dissolved the traditional top-down hierarchy and replaced it with a circular leadership model where every team rotated spokespersons monthly, and leadership bonuses were tied not to individual sales, but to collective outcomes, ethical practices, and peer reviews. A radical move in a cutthroat industry, but one that worked because the foundation was trust, not fear. And through it all, Danica remained unshaken in her core belief that legacy wasn't built by what you accumulate, but by what you protect. On the anniversary of the purge, she hosted a rooftop celebration, not to gloat, but to honor the survivors and the rebirth they had all chosen. She raised a glass not just to the rebuilt company, but to those who stayed when it was hard, spoke when it was dangerous, and believed when belief felt foolish. Her closing words that night weren't rehearsed, but rang like scripture. "We are not the sum of what we hide. We are the power of what we choose to fix. And this house, we built it clean, we built it true, and we'll defend it together." The team erupted in applause, not just for her but for themselves, for the journey, the pain, the fight, and the future. And as the city lights flickered beneath the skyline, and the stars overhead blinked in silent witness, Danica Cole stood at the edge of the rooftop, not alone, not feared, not hidden, and smiled, knowing she hadn't just reclaimed her company. She had rewritten the rulebook for every woman, every leader, every underestimated soul told to stay quiet, keep their head down, and mop around the mess. Because now the world knew what she had always known in her bones. Sometimes the real power doesn't sit at the boardroom table. It walks in silence, watches everything, waits for its moment, and when it rises, it doesn't knock, it cleans house.